If you were in stage two or watching stage two earlier this morning, you'll have been enthralled by an amazing panel discussion we had about supplier relationship management, which sort of descended into a marriage guidance counselling session. And if you were listening to that earlier, you'll know what I mean. And the subject of what we're going to talk about now is maintaining competitive tension within long-term relationships. I want to point out this has nothing to do with marriage guidance counselling, but it absolutely talks directly about good supplier relationship management. And I'm really pleased to invite on stage Roger Waring from UK Power Networks, which is a highly regulated company, and that I'm sure plays into this. And so, Roger, thank you for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I'm well aware that we're into the second half of the second day, so I'm going to keep it very simple, keep the language simple, but hopefully leave you with a few nuggets of learning certainly from my perspective, my team's perspective, and we'll see how we go. So we could potentially go down some rabbit holes in this subject matter. It could be a very broad subject, but as I say, I'm going to try and keep it fairly narrow and fairly generic. So whilst it does talk to my industry, hopefully it's applicable to yours as well. So who are UK Power Networks as a sort of starter for 10? Well, we don't sell energy, but we are part of the supply of energy to you, in that we own and operate the distribution network across the east of England, London and the southeast. And we have approximately 8.5 million customers and businesses that we distribute electricity to. So with that number, that makes us the largest DNO, distribution network operator, by customer number. Just to give you some idea of scale, and that'll lead on to a sense of scale of the supply chain as well. So we have just over a third of the UK's EVs connected to our network. Nearly 30% of the UK's peak demand on that network, and significantly 180,000 kilometres of overhead line infrastructure and underground cable. So there's a lot of infrastructure out there. Our job effectively is to keep the lights on for that 8.5 million customers. We do that with approximately 6,500 direct employees, but also an extensive supply chain. There's probably 2,000 roughly individuals out there working on the network as part of the supply chain, working on our behalf and supporting us. So that there's a considerable amount of individuals collaborating together to make sure that the lights stay on. What I wanted to just talk very briefly about, hopefully you find it brief, but there's something that holds all of those people together, whether they're internal, whether they're part of the supply chain. And this has been fairly consistent, or very consistent, over the 14 years of UK Power Networks being in existence. Is a very simple vision that's largely been unchanged for the last sort of decade and a half. And this underpins how we operate, how we want to deliver our services to our end customers. And by the way, largely speaking, you only become a customer of ours when the lights go out. So that's to be a respected and trusted corporate citizen. When you pick up the phone to us, we've got to try and, we are seeking to get best-in-class customer service in a situation where you're our customer because we've let you down. So that's quite a tough challenge. So fundamentally, we want to be an employer of choice. So that's for our employees and our supply chain. We want to be a respected and trusted corporate citizen. We need to be sustainably cost efficient. We are largely funded by the customer as part of your bill, and we need to be able to demonstrate value. Very important, certainly in recent years, is we want to ensure that we enable the net zero transition for all. So UK Power Networks doesn't want to be a blocker to the transition that we're going through. And we want to be the best performing distribution network operator in the country consistently. We need to do that within a set of values. You'll understand why I'm going into this level of detail, because it does feed into our supply chain. The values that we hold dear, this is how we operate between each other, between the workforce and the supply chain and customers, is fundamentally integrity. We do what we say we're going to do. We treat each other with respect. It goes for our customers as well. We believe that we're stronger together as a customer and supply chain, and with our customers, we need to understand from them what they need. So we develop a lot of our services around how we impact their lives. We act responsibly, so we have ethics, corporate ethics, safety, and social environmental awareness at the heart of the work that we deliver. And fundamentally, we want to keep improving. So we are technically a monopoly in the southeast of England. We want to demonstrate that we are continuing to provide best value for our customers, so we have to keep getting better. We're chasing ourselves largely to keep getting better. And given that it's National Inclusion Week, an important one, certainly not least, diversity and inclusiveness is a core belief within our business, and we recognise and encourage the importance of difference within our business, and that goes within the supply chain as well. So, a clear vision, a clear set of values fundamentally underpins how we operate as a business. How has that impacted our performance over the last 10 years or so? Significantly is the answer. So that consistency of doing the right things, doing them well, consistently, has improved things like safety. So we have an industry-leading safety record. We have an industry-leading customer service record. So 94% is what our customers score us when they interact with us, and that's when the power's gone out. So the way that we respond to that is fundamental in making sure that those customers are, while they might be in a situation where things have gone wrong, the way that we deal with that problem, we work very hard to make sure that customer service is at the heart of that. So all of these things, how we operate, how we work together, how we collaborate, have really driven performance. So what's that got to do with the supply chain? Well, you can't do a lot of those things with short-term transactional relationships. I mean, some things are going to be transactional. You don't necessarily need to have long-term relationships for everything that you buy. But if you want to drive performance, you want a supply chain that buys into your corporate vision, and you want to collaborate to continue to improve, then you need to foster that. So you need time. So the benefits, as I say, keeping it very simple, the benefits of long-term relationships are you have the time to foster that collaboration. You have the time to get corporate alignment. Within a short-term relationship or something that might be perceived short-term, it's unlikely you're going to get investment from the supply chain. A lot of what we do, whether that's tree cutting, whether that's laying cable, whether that's installing transformers, or it might be an IT system that underpins how the network is operated. That requires investment from the supply chain. So you're not going to invest in a fleet of vehicles or invest in upskilling scarce resources unless you've got some visibility of a long-term contract or relationship. So that's fundamentally what long-term relationships enable us to do. And constant change, from a safety perspective, constantly introducing new contractors that might be working in a safety-critical environment brings an element of risk. So we like to try, as far as we can, to maintain strong long-term relationships, certainly in a safety-critical environments, and get that alignment. So that's all good. There are lots of benefits to having long-term relationships, but are there some pitfalls? Now, we're looking for continuous improvement, but if we're just working with a small number of players in a relatively niche industry, is there a risk that we're locking out new entrants, new ways of thinking? Quite possibly. over time, as a relationship gets comfortable, there's the potential for complacency to creep in. Certainly we don't want that in a safety environment, but complacency in terms of how well we're performing per pound of value that we're receiving. That can happen on both sides. There's sort of micro inefficiencies that build up over time, and before we know it, we're not quite sure what value we're getting. So that perceived value erosion leads us to a question, and procurement individuals, they see these questions laid out in front of them. We need to prove value. We think the grass might be greener elsewhere, and we can't prove that our supply chain's not complacent, so we'll just tender it. And that might be an answer. It may be an answer, but we've just discussed the fact that there are lots of benefits to long-term relationships. So just because it's been running for a long time, do we throw that away and bring in something new just to prove those statements so that we can prove the value because we got the cheapest that tendered, or that we've now got a view of who wants to play in that market? So there are some negatives to long-term relationships. And if we want to tender it, if we want to insert some competitive tension into that environment, that has some negative effects, or could have some negative effects. So if somebody has made that investment, they've ordered a new fleet of vehicles, they've brought in 100 new excellent engineers, or trained them up over a number of years. If you then insert some competitive tension in the way that you say, well, you've been running for 3 years, we haven't tendered it, and we're going to keep your contract running, but we're just going to get a check price over here. We're going to give that piece of work to somebody else and see how that performs. You start to erode the trust in that long-term relationship, and then the next time round, are they willing to invest in that full long-term contract? Because they may think that after a certain period of time, I might start to lose it. It might be at risk. So I'm not going to make that investment in my infrastructure or my staff. Additionally, it adds an administrative burden to your own organisation. If you want to prove the value of every pound spent, you could end up going down a track of employing lots of commercial individuals, lots of QSs, and doing lots of sort of analysis in lots and lots of detail to get to really understand what we've got. But my question is there another way? So to give ourselves comfort that these things aren't real, so that give ourselves comfort that there is some good value, that the grass isn't greener, and avoid complacency. There are things that you can do throughout the length of a contract. It doesn't necessarily have to be open competition. There can be competition within a number of entities that are delivering the same thing, but that's a very different thing. That's not opening up to the wide world to throw things away and start again. So benchmarking is, we all know what benchmarking is. It's a price. It's a proxy that we think is the frontier for delivering whatever it is, whether it's goods, works, or services. We utilise that heavily in our industry. Our regulator, Ofgem, has a frontier price that they use to determine our next price control allowance. So we get an allowance over a number of years, and that's effectively the income that we have to spend on delivering these services. That's based on a series of benchmarks. It's much more complicated than I've explained there, but I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But benchmarks can be useful, but they're a proxy. And people, when you're tendering, it can drive a different level of value. Sometimes you could buy the contract and then seek to increase the price over time. We could utilise industry insight. So is the grass greener? The closer you get to what's going on in the wider world outside of your supply chain, you get a view of whether the grass really is greener. How are other people performing? What's their supply chain doing? One that we've introduced relatively recently, but I think it has a lot of potential, is this frontier target price. So a number of competing entities, contractors, operating in this, delivering similar works, but in different parts of our patch. The way that that is likely to operate, and we tendered it in this way, and I think that's the key thing I'll come on to shortly. Over time, instead of opening that up to wide competition, going back to market for the whole thing, we look for the frontier price for delivering certain things across that suite of contracts, and then we work with them to try and find ways of everybody getting to that best price. Because if one can do it, the others can do it. And that's part of the sort of supply relationship management journey. It's not saying, unless you can deliver it for that price, you're out. We've got evidence that somebody can do it for less. So let's work together and find a way to get you to that value, get you to that price point. So there are lots of ways within a contract, within a relationship, to give you comfort that the grass isn't necessarily greener and prove that value. But fundamentally, you can't insert that randomly at some point within a contract. Ideally, you've set it up in such a way where you can do those things, and it's not going to disrupt the relationship. So how do we maintain a healthy relationship? Firstly, choose carefully. So don't just go for the lowest price, which is obviously important, but don't just go for the lowest price that meets your specification. If you want a successful long-term relationship, look for companies that can partner with you, that understand your vision and values, and can support that and be part of delivering that. Build into your contracts the option for flexibility, the option for potentially changing the way that something works over time, depending on something that may have happened. You know, things do change. We know full well over the last 3-4 years that things can change. So you need to build into your contracts the ability for things to change. Be clear from the outset how performance and value is going to be measured and shared and driven towards. Again, introducing things randomly at some point in the contract erodes trust and can make people sort of back off a bit and say, well, it's not quite how I understood it when I bid for this. Significantly, avoid major directional change. Most companies can deal with sort of tapping the tiller and moving towards something and making small directional changes, but you can't expect your supply chain to be comfortable with the direction of travel if you significantly flip it to operate in a different way because you're reacting to something. So that's a key one for me. Consider resilience. So things do change. Companies get acquired, key individuals leave, so relationships change. So build that into the way that you both tender but also manage your contracts. Build in a method of navigating those changes. And ultimately invest in that relationship. Back to the CRM model, SRM model that we were discussing at the forum earlier. If you want your supply chain to perform in alignment with your vision and values and drive towards best value, you need to invest in that. You can't expect them to do it on their own. High performance isn't a naturally occurring phenomenon. You've got to work with them to get there. So I guess just key takeaways for me is don't miss out on the benefits of a long-term relationship because often they're key to getting to where you want to go. It's fundamental to invest in something long-term if continuous improvement is what you're after. But importantly, be clear about how you're going to manage the contract, how those mechanisms are going to work. Be clear from the outset. Put it in the documents you're sending out there. Or as part of your pre-tender research, discuss it with the potential bidders. There's no harm in investigating how people feel about the mechanisms that you might be deploying. And then invest in that relationship once you've made your choices. Develop a high-performance culture within the supply chain so that you have comfort that you've got value and you don't need to just randomly insert a change of direction or competition. So that's all I have. Hopefully that was of use. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions at all for Roger? We have a question. We'll get a mic down. We're actually at the end of our time, so again, we've got to be laser sharp and quick.
Hi, Roger. Thank you for the presentation. So my question is, what I found is not necessarily the price, that becomes an issue, but it's, the level of innovation that a supplier, if it's a single source supplier, would bring, and also potentially the investment they would be making into the relationship because they are just taking you for granted.
Yeah, you're quite right, but I think hopefully, if you set it up in a way that you can demonstrate, you've got measures of success within the contract, or you can performance manage it in a way that you know what you're getting for your money. And if you've got a strong enough relationship where they can come to you and say, if you want us to get to that next level of performance, we need some help. We need some investment in us in order to make that next step up. So again, it's back to strong supplier relationship management, clarity of what's in the contract, clarity of your measures, what good looks like, and then just try and go on that journey together.
Roger, thank you for the question.